My parents called me a failure and gave my brother $200,000 for a house, so I walked away and never looked back. 2 years later, my brother drove past my estate and called my father screaming. They showed up expecting to gloat, but had no idea their failure was now living a life they could only dream of. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary usually meant peace in our family home, a rare truce in the unspoken war of expectations. But that Sunday, the aroma felt suffocating, a heavy blanket over the tensions simmering at the dinner table. I was exhausted, my hands aching from a long week of sanding oak in my small, rented workshop. I'd just completed a commissioned dining set, a piece I was immensely proud of, but I knew better than to mention it. Here, my work was a source of shame, not pride. My brother, Liam, was holding court, as always. He talked about his latest marketing campaign, using words like synergy and optimization that made my father, Robert, nod with a deep, rumbling satisfaction. My mother, Margaret, watched him with an adoring gaze, as if he were single-handedly holding up the economy. And the best part, Liam said, pausing for dramatic effect, is that Sarah and I finally found a place. A beautiful colonial in the Northgate suburbs. We put in an offer and it was accepted this morning. "Oh, darling, that's wonderful," my mother exclaimed, clapping her hands together. My father beamed. "That's my boy. Knew you'd land on your feet. That's what a real career gets you." He shot a pointed look across the table at me. I kept my eyes on my plate, methodically cutting a green bean into smaller and smaller pieces. "We couldn't have done it without you, of course," Liam added, raising his glass. The 200,000 was, well, it was everything, a true foundation. The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly against the china. $200,000. The number echoed in the sudden silence, a gunshot in a library. I looked from my brother's smug face to my parents' proud ones. My mind raced back to 6 months earlier when I'd timidly asked them for a small loan, just $5,000, to upgrade my failing lathe machine. My father had lectured me for an hour about the irresponsibility of pouring money into a dirty hobby and the importance of financial independence. I felt a cold wave wash over me, a chilling clarity. All the years of dismissive comments, the belittling of my passion, the endless praise for Liam's perfectly ordinary life, it all coalesced into this one, staggering act of favoritism. 200,000, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father's face hardened. "Liam has a family to think about, Eleanor. He has a future. He's building something real." "And what am I building?" I challenged, the whisper turning to steel. "The furniture I create, the business I am trying to grow from nothing, that isn't real." He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't be dramatic. You play with wood in a dusty garage. He's a manager at a respected firm. It's not the same. We invest in success, not failure." The word hung in the air between us. Failure. It wasn't the first time he'd used it, but it was the last time I would ever let him. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Every eye was on me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply looked at my father, my mother, and my brother and felt a profound tectonic shift inside me. The desperate need for their approval, a hunger that had gnawed at me my entire life, simply vanished. The betrayal was worse than any insult. I drove home that night in a daze, the familiar streets of my hometown feeling alien and hostile. The Sunday dinner had been the final fracture in a foundation that had been cracking for years. When I walked into my small apartment, the faint, comforting smell of cedar and varnish from my work clothes did little to soothe the gaping wound in my chest. For years, I had held onto a sliver of hope that one day they would see me. Not the daughter who didn't go to business school, but the daughter who could turn a block of raw timber into a piece of functional art. That hope was gone now, incinerated by the casual cruelty of my father's words and the crushing weight of that $200,000 figure. The next morning, I began the process of severing ties. It felt like a grim, methodical amputation. I went through my phone and blocked their numbers. Father, mother, Liam. I took down the few family photos I had on my bookshelf, images of forced smiles and awkward holidays, and placed them in a box. I didn't smash them or tear them. I simply put them away, closing a chapter of my life with a quiet finality. The silence that followed was deafening. At first. My phone, which once buzzed with my mother's critical texts about my clothes or my father's forwarded articles about real jobs, was now still. No calls, no messages. Weeks turned into a month. The quiet was initially filled with grief, a hollow ache for the family I wished I had. But slowly, something else began to grow in its place. Resolve. They thought I was a failure because my hands were calloused and my nails were often filled with sawdust. They couldn't see the value in creating something tangible, something lasting. Their world was one of spreadsheets and promotions, of appearances and keeping up with the Joneses. My world was one of grain patterns, dovetail joints, and the deep satisfaction of a perfectly finished surface. One evening, sitting in my workshop and staring at the plans for a complex armoire, a thought solidified in my mind. It became a mantra I repeated to myself during the long nights and early mornings that followed. They had forgotten one crucial thing. Sawdust and sweat can build more than calluses. It can build a foundation. It can build an enterprise. It can build a life so beautiful and so successful that their narrow definition of success would look like a cage in comparison. I would not build my future to prove them wrong. I would build it to prove myself right. The anger and hurt began to cool, hardening into fuel. The emotional energy I had wasted for years trying to earn their love would now be funneled into my work, into my own vision. I would not call them. I would not write. I would simply disappear from their lives and build my own world, one perfectly measured, cut, and assembled piece at a time. Looking back, the signs were always there, etched into the grain of our family history. My father, Robert, was a man who measured life in numbers. As a retired accountant, he saw everything as a balance sheet. College degrees were assets, corporate jobs were revenue streams, and my woodworking was a non-performing liability. He praised Liam for landing a paid internship while I spent a summer apprenticing for free under a master craftsman, an experience he dismissed as manual labor. He framed Liam's diploma and hung it in the study. My first award from a local artisan guild was left on the kitchen counter until it was accidentally stained by a coffee cup. My mother, Margaret, was his loyal treasurer, reinforcing his values with a softer, more insidious touch. "Eleanor, darling," she'd say, wrinkling her nose at the wood dust on my jeans, "don't you want a nice, clean job? Think of your hands." She doted on Liam, praising his knack for business, when he convinced our father to co-sign a loan for a flashy car he couldn't afford. Meanwhile, she'd helpfully leave brochures for paralegal programs on my bed. Their house was a museum of their values. Everything was polished, store-bought, and impeccably arranged. There was no soul in it, no mark of the hand. It was the complete opposite of what I cherished. I remembered once in high school I spent a month building a beautiful cherrywood bookshelf for my mother's birthday. I was so proud of it. When I presented it to her, she smiled thinly and said, "Oh, it's rustic." She placed it in the guest room, where it was eventually used to hold old towels. A year later, she bought a flat-pack laminate monstrosity from a big-box store and placed it in the exact spot in the living room I had designed mine for. Liam learned their lessons well. He developed a slick, corporate charm and a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. He would visit my workshop, lean against a stack of expensive black walnut I had saved for months to afford, and say things like, "Still playing with your little projects, Elle? I just closed a 5-figure ad deal." He didn't understand that the value of the wood he was disrespecting was more than he made in a week. He couldn't grasp that my little projects were commissioned by people who appreciated artistry and were willing to pay handsomely for it. To him, and to my parents, if it didn't come with a title and a benefits package, it wasn't real. The $200,000 wasn't just a gift, it was a statement. It was the ultimate validation of Liam's path and the ultimate condemnation of mine. They weren't just funding his house, they were funding their own belief system, cementing the family narrative with Robert and Margaret as the wise investors and Liam as the blue-chip stock. I was the venture they had written off as a complete loss. The first year of silence was the hardest, but also the most productive. I channeled every ounce of grief and anger into my work. I took on every commission, worked 18-hour days, and saved money with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. The pain became a chisel, carving away my self-doubt and leaving behind a harder, more resilient core. I wasn't just building furniture anymore, I was building capital. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. As reviewing my finances, and for the first time, the numbers on my business balance sheet looked solid. They were more than solid, they were promising. It was enough. Enough to stop renting, enough to stop dreaming small. It was time to build a real home for my business and for myself. My investigation wasn't for blackmail or revenge. It was a hunt for potential. I started looking for property, not in the pristine suburbs my brother favored, but further out, in the rolling hills where land was cheaper and forgotten old farms were left to decay. I wasn't just looking for a plot of land. I was looking for a place with character, with good bones, something that, like me, had been overlooked but was full of hidden strength. My strategy was simple: find what no one else wanted and make it indispensable. After weeks of searching, I found it. It was a 10-acre property with a dilapidated 19th-century farmhouse and a massive, crumbling barn. The real estate agent tried to talk me out of it, pointing out the rotted siding, the leaky roof, and the overgrown fields. But I saw something else. I saw the hand-hewn beams in the barn, the solid stone foundation of the house, and the ancient oak tree standing sentinel on the hill. Securing the loan was an ordeal. I walked into the bank with sawdust on my boots and a portfolio binder thick with my business plan, 3 years of financial records, and letters from high-profile clients. The first loan officer, a man who reminded me painfully of my father, looked at my profession and almost laughed me out of his office. But I persisted. I found a younger banker at a smaller credit union, a woman who listened intently as I laid out my vision. A state-of-the-art workshop in the restored barn, a beautiful home, and a business that would bring master craftsmanship back to the region. She saw the numbers, she saw my client list, and she saw my determination. She approved the loan. The day I signed the papers was my true Independence Day. Standing on the porch of my broken-down house, looking out over my wild, untamed 10 acres, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt powerful. This was my leverage. My clever trap wasn't a scheme, it was a blueprint. My family saw value in new, shiny things bought with easy money. I was about to prove that true, lasting value comes from vision, patience, and hard, unrelenting work. The next 2 years were a blur of demolition and creation. I lived in a small trailer on the property while I poured every dollar and every waking hour into the restoration. I hired local contractors to help with the heavy lifting, the new roof, the plumbing, the electrical, but I did most of the finishing work myself. I restored the original hardwood floors in the house, milled new trim from trees on my own property, and designed a kitchen that was both modern and true to the farmhouse's spirit. The barn was my masterpiece. I transformed the cavernous, decaying structure into a woodworker's dream. It had soaring ceilings, north-facing windows for perfect light, and every tool I had ever wanted. My small business, once crammed into a rented garage, now had a magnificent home. And the business grew. My client list, which had started with local homeowners, began to include interior designers from the city, architects, and even a few minor celebrities who wanted unique, handcrafted pieces. My work was my only advertisement. Quality speaks for itself, and word was spreading. The first public reveal came unexpectedly. A freelance writer for a popular online design journal was doing a story on rural artisans. She heard about my workshop and asked to visit. She was captivated not just by my furniture, but by the story of the property's transformation. The article she wrote was titled, "The Sleeping Farmhouse: How a Master Woodworker Breathed Life into a Forgotten Gem." It went viral in design circles. It was shared on blogs and social media, showcasing beautiful, sun-drenched photos of my finished home, my workshop, and a few of my recent creations. I felt a quiet thrill seeing my work, my home, celebrated. It was a validation that came from strangers who appreciated the art, not from family members who demanded a certain kind of life. For a moment, a flicker of fear went through me. What if my family saw it? But I quickly pushed it aside. It didn't matter. Their opinion was no longer the currency I dealt in. This external recognition was a confrontation with my old self, the young woman who craved her family's approval. Seeing my name in print, my work praised by experts, I realized I had finally stopped looking over my shoulder for their nod. The article was proof that I had succeeded on my own terms, in my own world. It was a quiet, personal victory, a reveal that mattered only to me. It solidified my resolve and prepared me, unknowingly, for the much larger confrontation that was heading my way, barreling down a country road in a sleek, overpriced sedan. Liam always low. Ved taking the scenic route. He considered it a mark of his leisurely, successful lifestyle, a way to escape the hustle of his suburban life. It was this habit that, 2 years and 3 months after I had last seen him, led him down the winding country road that bordered my property. From his perspective, it must have been a jarring sight. He would have remembered this area as nothing but sleepy farms and rundown properties. But there, set back from the road, was a perfectly restored white farmhouse with a slate gray roof, surrounded by manicured lawns and a field of wildflowers. And next to it, the magnificent barn, its modern glass doors gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked like something straight out of the design magazine his wife, Sarah, left on their coffee table. He slowed his car, intrigued. According to the story he later screamed over the phone to my father, he was just admiring the place, perhaps feeling a pang of jealousy. He and Sarah were already feeling squeezed by their massive mortgage on the perfect colonial home. He was probably thinking about how much a property like this would cost. Then he saw me. I was outside, loading a finished credenza into the back of my delivery van with the help of my 2 young apprentices. He saw the sign at the end of my driveway, a simple, elegant piece of carved oak. Eleanor Vance Woodworking. The disbelief was so profound he had to pull over. He watched for several minutes, his mind unable to reconcile the image of his failure of a sister with the owner of this stunning estate. This couldn't be my house. This couldn't be my business. It was impossible. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking with a mixture of shock and a rage he didn't yet understand. The phone call to our father was, by all accounts, hysterical. "You need to get over here, now," Liam yelled, his voice cracking. "You will not believe what I am looking at. It's Eleanor, that old abandoned farm on Route 12. It's hers, the whole thing. You need to see this." My father was confused, then dismissive. "Liam, calm down. What are you talking about? She probably rented a room there." "Rented a room?" Liam shrieked, his voice climbing higher. "Dad, it looks like a resort. There's a sign, a huge workshop. This is insane. You gave me money for a starter home in the suburbs, and she's out here living on some kind of palace." The case was being built, not by me, but by my brother's envy. The evidence was my home, my land, my thriving business. To them, it was an aberration, something that didn't fit the narrative they had written for me. And so they decided to come see for themselves, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. They loaded into my father's car, Robert, Margaret, and Liam, a united front of disbelief, driving out to confront the daughter who had dared to succeed without their permission. They arrived an hour later. I saw the familiar silver sedan pull up my long gravel driveway, and a strange calm settled over me. I had imagined this moment so many times, playing out scenes of angry words and tearful accusations. But now that it was here, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of readiness. I was standing on my own ground in every sense of the word. I walked out onto the porch as they got out of the car. Their faces were a study in bewilderment. My father's jaw was tight, my mother's hand was at her throat, and Liam looked pale and furious. They stared at the house, at the flower beds I had planted, at the stone walkway I had laid. They were trying to find a flaw, a crack in the facade that would prove their worldview right. "Eleanor," my father said, his voice strained. "What is all this?" "It's my home, Dad," I replied simply. "Welcome." I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and led them inside. The interior, with its clean lines, custom-built furniture, and sunlit spaces, only deepened their shock. Liam ran a hand over the massive dining table in the center of the room. "This must have cost a fortune," he muttered, the words laced with accusation. "I made it," I said, meeting his gaze. "I made almost everything in here." I gave them the tour. I was polite, detached, like a real estate agent showing a property to skeptical buyers. I showed them the gourmet kitchen, the living room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, which I had also built, and the master bedroom overlooking the valley. With every room, their silence grew heavier. This wasn't the life of a failure. This was the life of someone who was wealthier and, more importantly, happier than they were. The final stop was the workshop. As we walked into the barn, their composure finally shattered. The sheer scale of the operation, the professional-grade machinery, the stacks of exotic hardwood, the scent of industry and success, was undeniable. My two apprentices were quietly working on their own projects in a corner, and they nodded respectfully at me. "Who are they?" my mother asked, gesturing at them as if they were zoo animals. "That's Ben and Chloe," I said. "They're my apprentices. I'm teaching them the trade." That was the final blow for Liam. The idea that I was not just a craftswoman but a mentor, a business owner, an employer. It was too much. "How?" he finally exploded, his voice echoing in the vast space. "How did you do this? Did you win the lottery? Who gave you the money for all this?" I turned to face him, to face all of them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No one gave me anything," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I earned it, I built it, with my own two hands. The ones you always said were too dirty." I walked over to my office in the corner and picked up a copy of the design magazine I had been featured in. I opened it to the article and laid it on a workbench in front of them. "The Sleeping Farmhouse," the headline read. They stared at the glossy photos of my home, my face smiling back at them. They had no words. The proof was irrefutable, the narrative they had clung to for decades destroyed in a single afternoon. The drive back to their home must have been silent and suffocating. They had arrived armed with judgment and suspicion, expecting to find me in over my head, living a lie. Instead, they found a truth that was more galling than any failure. I was thriving. I hadn't just survived without them. I had flourished in their absence. A week later, my mother called. It was the first time I had heard her voice in over 2 years. Her tone was stilted, uncertain. She didn't apologize. I never expected her to, but she asked questions. She asked about the house, about the business. It was a clumsy attempt to bridge a chasm they had spent a lifetime digging. "Your father, he was surprised," she offered, as if this were a grand concession. "I'm sure he was," I replied, my voice neutral. I felt no anger, no triumph, just a distant sort of pity. I kept the conversation short. I explained, gently but firmly, that while the door to my life wasn't sealed shut, it was no longer wide open. Any relationship we might have in the future would be on new terms. It would be based on respect for who I am and what I do, not on their outdated and damaging expectations. There would be no more condescending remarks, no more comparisons to Liam. I didn't need them to understand my choices, only to respect them. Liam never called. I heard through a cousin that he and his wife were struggling financially, that the beautiful colonial house was a gilded cage of debt. His jealousy had been a mirror, reflecting his own insecurities. The $200,000 hadn't been a foundation, it had been a crutch, and he didn't know how to walk without it. My father remained silent. His pride was too vast, his error in judgment too monumental to admit. His silence was the loudest confession of all. He had invested in the wrong future. My vindication didn't come from their shock or their begrudging phone call. It came from the quiet moments that followed. It was in the satisfaction of signing paychecks for my apprentices, in the glowing thank you note from a client in California, in the feeling of the morning sun on my face as I drank coffee on the porch I had built myself. I had spent so much of my life feeling like I was on the outside of my own family, looking in. Now I finally understood. I hadn't been an outcast. I had been a pioneer. They were stuck in their polished, predictable world, while I had gone out into the wilderness and built a kingdom from scratch. My hands were still calloused, often stained with varnish and flecked with sawdust. But they were the hands of a creator, a business owner, a free woman. And that was a success my father's balance sheets could never measure.